Pokemon?
Sure. My phone is in the living room.
Okay, maybe it's a bit loud.
No, it'll be all right, I think. If you close the other door.
Okay. There is a very small breeze. I would let you use my headphones because they provide better audio, but you know, they're broken.
Hi.
Hello.
Technical difficulties. Sorry about that. Hopefully other people will join us. So just wait another minute or two since there are still participants.
Hi.
Thanks, Rhoda. Okay, let's see. Most of us are here. There are 13 of us here. Well, more than half of us are here, I should say. So just wait another minute and then get started. Let's see. Well, here's one more person. Donicia, you may find some of this, maybe not all, but some of it repetitious from the last meeting. So I just want to warn you of that. Okay. Hello?
Hello, yes.
That's for Donicia. I hope I said that correctly.
What?
Are you?
My name is Aaron.
But okay, well, anyway, never mind. Okay, one more person. Thank you. Close the door, okay? Thank you. Sorry, we have family around and so on. The cats are around periodically. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Out, out, out.
Look at this.
Sorry. Okay, we're finally alone. Okay, so sorry to keep you waiting. Welcome back to Zoom meeting number 2 of Photo 4. Hopefully you've seen, I did add some things to the Canvas site. I hope they are in fact live. My first question is, you may have to unmute yourself, though I supposedly have unmuted all of you. I still see mute signs, but anyway, With respect to both.
Because I have a dog. And he will
Sorry?
bark. I just muted
Okay.
myself because my dog will bark.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
No worries. So with respect to cameras and Lightroom. So first, how many of you are still in need or are in need of a camera for this class? And speak up because I can't see you all. Anybody?
I do.
So you all have, okay, great. So you need to have a camera that allows you to control the aperture settings and the shutter settings, so the shutter speeds. So phones have excellent cameras, but they don't really offer you that kind of control. Smaller point and shoots, the really small point and shoots also do not, but some of the larger point and shoots do. So check the settings if needed. Okay, so we're good on cameras. Now, Lightroom. You will need Lightroom or access to Adobe Lightroom for this class. And of course, normally we would be working in the lab, which has 25 computers with Lightroom on them. How many of you are in need of Lightroom? Anybody? You all have access to Adobe Lightroom. Fantastic.
I
need one.
Sorry, sir?
No, I haven't downloaded it yet, but I will.
Okay, great. You'll need it sooner rather than later, though not today, but I hope to get started at least with the basics pretty soon. Okay, so the sooner we get going in Lightroom, the sooner you can be actually working on and manipulating your images. Right. Okay. Any questions or comments before we get going?
Yeah, if we don't have a camera, where would we be able to get one? Or where would we be able to get a good price or something? I don't know.
Well, my first recommendation always is to ask family and friends who often have, maybe they don't want you to use their current editions, but many people, upgrade and just set aside their older equipment. So many people do have older cameras around, ask around. I don't necessarily recommend buying a camera sight unseen online, or at least not a used one. A new one you would presumably or usually buy from a store, though not always. And in that case, you have some recourse, but you don't always with used equipment when purchased online. So I would be wary of that. But you can get relatively inexpensive, and it's all relative, but relatively inexpensive cameras that still do what you need them to do. So I don't know what your price range is, but you can even get digital SLRs in the $500 range. So look around, ask around. Again, I don't work for or own stock in Costco, but I do think that they are a good source of relatively inexpensive equipment. You can get good prices on cameras and also on memory cards and so on from Costco. Okay. And they also, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
I had a suggestion. My sister, she actually got a really good camera, the same one as mine, on like QVC, and they let you do flex play. So you could always go on that website and look for a digital camera, and they let you do payment plans.
Right. That is nice.
Suggestion.
That's nice to have. Yeah, We don't all have big chunks of money ready to, put out there. Any other questions, comments? Okay, well, last time we left off having just done a slight or brief introduction to the SLR camera, the single reflex camera. And so I want to continue with that. Again, for those of you, Donicia or anyone else who has had a photo class, some of this will be repetition, but though this is digital photography, it's a beginning photo class, right? All right, so the SLR, and let me bring up, diagram. Where do things go? Oh, irritating. Darn it. Here somewhere. Okay. So the SLR camera, can you guys see this thing here? My diagram? Yes? No?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So these notes will be posted on Canvas along with typewritten information. But these are original notes, not that old, but just so you can see what you would have experienced had we been in class. So the basic construction of the camera. All cameras function similarly in that information enters, that is visual information, enters the camera through the lens and is then recorded in the camera either on film or with a digital sensor. The lens, which we'll discuss in greater detail, is very important. What is the function of the lens? Anybody? Anybody know why we use lenses?
Is it to focus the light onto the sensor?
Exactly. So the lens made up of these elements or pieces of ground glass focus the light that enters the camera. And as we use glasses also, the camera would record information without a lens. You can take a picture, but the information that enters the camera then would be out of focus. It would be blurry. You just see blobs of colors and areas of light and dark. So the lens is really important because it does focus the light entering the camera. And so the quality of the lens is important because it determines, to a great extent, the quality of the image. So we'll talk about lenses in greater detail. But with the SLR, the light enters the camera through the lens, and then it's intercepted by this thing here called the reflex mirror. And that's why the camera is called a reflex camera, because it has this mirror that allows us to see what will be recorded by the camera before we actually take the picture. So the, the reflex mirror reflects the light that has entered the camera up into this upper area of the camera body which contains something called a penta for 5. So it's a 5-sided prism that bounces the light around in it and then out through the eyepiece, the eye. And And in this way, it overcomes this offsetting in height between the level of the lens and the level of the eyepiece. So we can see what will be recorded. When we're ready to make the image, after we focused and composed and, you know, our image is as we want it to be, we take the picture, and we do that by pushing the button up at the top of the camera, which is called the shutter release button. And when we do that, a couple of things happen at the same time. And the first is that this reflex mirror pops up out of the way. And that allows the light to continue into the body of the camera. And it is then intercepted by the shutter. And the shutter is a window that is located at the back of the camera. And in digital cameras, you can't really see it, but this is a film camera. And so if you can see, let me hold this open with my chin. You can see this rectangle in here. That is that's the shutter. And it's one of two mechanisms that we use to allow light into the camera and to control the amount of light entering the camera. So the shutter opens and closes, like so. And the camera, or you, or we, can control the length of time that the shutter remains open. So when we push the shutter release button, again, the reflex mirror pops up out of the way and the shutter opens. And this allows light to pass all the way back into the body of the camera, where it is intercepted by either the film or the digital sensor. And then that information is recorded by the film or the sensor, and the shutter closes and the reflex mirror goes back into place, and then you're ready to make another image. Excuse me. So I want to talk about what happens to that information. I was going to say briefly, but I probably won't be that brief. Film, which has been used in its present form for about the last 150 years, and it's still used by some people. Film uses silver technology. So it's been known for about 300 years that certain silver compounds, that's a combination of silver metal and another element, are sensitive to light. They change or darken upon exposure to light. And it wasn't for a couple of hundred years after, until the early 1800s, that it was figured out how to control the process. But at any rate, modern film is a piece of plastic onto which a light-sensitive silver emulsion has been coated. And so modern film uses gelatin. Gelatin is made from the boiled hides and hooves of horses and cows, and it forms this gelatinous stuff. Jello contains gelatin. So if you're a vegetarian, you probably don't want to eat jello. So gelatin is taken, and one of these silver compounds, silver iodide or silver bromide or silver chloride, is used in this. And so it's dissolved or mixed into the gelatin, and then that's coated on to a piece of plastic or paper, in the case of the paper that's used in the darkroom. And then that paper or film is sensitive to light. So I put in a cassette for film to be used in cameras. So that's film technology. The digital camera uses a digital sensor in place of film. And I'll talk about the construction of that in a moment. But the sensor records that same information, but instead of it being stored in silver and gelatin, that information is taken in and then digitized and then organized into a file type and transferred to a memory card. So the film has just one piece of equipment, the film, which both records the information and stores it. With digital cameras, the information is recorded by the sensor. That information is then transferred to a memory card, which is where it is stored. So the sensor itself, the sensor, come on, the spinning beach ball. The sensor, the digital sensor, is actually an array of millions of little sensors that are called pixels. And I'm sure you've heard of pixels. The word pixel stands for picture element. So the basic photo element in digital photography is that little sensor, the pixel. And modern sensors are made up of millions and millions of these little pixels. So 1 million pixels is equal to what's called 1 megapixel. And I'm sure that you've seen or heard of megapixels, and cameras are advertised to have a certain number of megapixels in what's called the resolution. And the more pixels, the more megapixels the camera has, generally speaking, the higher quality the image is. The more information is recorded, and so the sharper the image appears. Any questions thus far? So your cameras, for example, probably have about 7 megapixels of resolution. That's what most your phone cameras. Your phone cameras probably have about 7 megapixels. That's what most modern phones have in that range. The first camera I had, which was given to me in the year 2000, a long time ago, had a capacity of 1.7 megapixels. So that's minuscule compared to even a modern phone camera, much less regular cameras. Anyway, generally speaking, the more megapixels your camera has, your sensor has, the sharper your images will appear, the more information is recorded, and in general, the more expensive it will be as well. Each pixel has a little filter placed in front of it, a color filter, and it will be either red, green, or blue. And that's how the colors are divided in this case. If you've ever worked with magazine stuff or printing, maybe you've dealt with CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So those are some attractive colors and RGB, but it's just a way of combining colors to get more colors. So of the 1 million pixels in 1 megapixel, there are 250,000 red pixels, 250,000 blue pixels, and 500,000 green pixels. And there are more green because apparently our eyes are much more sensitive to the green portion of the spectrum than to red and blue. So, there are 2 types of sensors used in digital cameras. The CCD, which stands for charge coupled device, and the CMOS, which stands for complementary symmetry metal oxide semiconductor, and you do not have to know those things. They're just 2 types of sensors that do the same thing in the end. So they record or pull in the information slightly differently, but the end result is the same. They record that visual or analog information coming into the camera. So each pixel records information about how much light there is and the color And then the sensor takes that information and converts it to digital form. So the information from each pixel is given a numerical value. So it's converted to digital. And then that information is organized. It's given form. In fact, it's given a format. And we'll talk about file formats in a little bit. But then those files, all of the images that you've taken, are transferred to a memory card. And so there are two types of memory cards at this point. Actually, there's a third one now that I have to get down here. But right now, for now, two types of memory cards, a compact flash card and an SD card. In the past, compact flash cards were what were used almost exclusively. Then SD cards were introduced, and SD cards at first were just used for lower end cameras, but now they're used for higher end cameras. And so anyway, the SD card looks like this. And so that's one side. And then on the other side, it has these metal contacts that make contact with sensors in the camera. And in that way, they transfer information. So I've taken that out of the camera, and always, always, always make sure that your camera is powered down, that it's turned off before you take out or insert a memory card, change the lens or anything of that sort. Make sure that the camera is turned off. So then the information is transferred to the memory card. Memory cards come in different capacities. That is, they will hold different amounts of information, as do, you know, thumb drive or flash drives. The one I just showed you is a 64 gigabyte card. That's a relatively large card, though not anything close to the largest that you can purchase at this point. I recommend having several cards and not just one enormous card where you've stored like 5 years of information, because what if, God forbid, you lose it or it gets damaged, or you were silly enough not to transfer the information from the card to a hard drive? You could lose it all. So I think better to have several memory cards rather than just one huge one. Okay. Here's one of the many spiels I will give you. And the first is that you should always regularly download or transfer those images from your memory card to a more permanent place, your computer's hard drive, an external hard drive. Computer hard drives fill up pretty quickly if you take a lot of images or make a lot of images. So I recommend getting an external hard drive of some sort. They also come in different capacities. Some of them up to 6 or 8 terabytes of information. You may not need such a huge one, but 1 or 2, you know, a 2 terabyte hard drive holds a tremendous amount of information. So you want to regularly transfer your images. Don't leave them on the SD, or don't leave them on memory cards. They're terrible for long-term storage. They're easily lost and they're easily damaged, which will mean that your images are damaged or lost. So any magnet can erase the information on your memory cards. Water, especially salt water, is death to all electronics. The electronics, the wires and so on will start to corrode almost immediately if they come into contact with salt water. So you want to be very careful. And again, just transfer your images regularly. I periodically go onto my sister's camera and see that she has images on the card from 2 years ago. So don't do that. Okay, any questions on memory cards or anything thus far? Anybody? No. Okay. The format of camera that we use is called small format, 35 millimeter format. And that is based on the film that is used in these cameras, which is 35 millimeter film. And it's called that because the width of the film is 35 millimeters. So just a moment here. So you know that 35 millimeter film comes in these cassettes, and the width of the film in there is 35 millimeters. And at this point in history, this is pretty much the standard of cameras that is used. The film, I'm sure you've all at least seen film, if not all used, maybe all of you haven't used it, but you've seen it. And the film is this piece of plastic. It has images on it. And the images are, the dimensions of the images are determined by the dimension of the shutter, which I showed you. And in 35 millimeter cameras, those dimensions are 24 by 36 millimeters. And you're saying to yourself, who cares? Why is she giving us this detail? For one main reason, and that is that these dimensions have been carried over to digital cameras. And so even though we don't use film in digital cameras, the size of the sensor in the higher end DSLRs, digital SLRs, those sensors have the same dimensions as the film. And that is desirable because the larger the sensor, the more pixels there are and the more information is recorded, the sharper your image looks, the more details you get. Not all digital cameras, in fact, most digital cameras do not have this full-size sensor. So when you go, if you go to buy a camera, the camera will tell you if it does. If it doesn't say anything, it doesn't have a full-size sensor. If it has a full-size sensor, I want you to know that. And so the DSLRs that have full-size sensors obviously cost more money. And those bodies start around $1,800 to $2,000, maybe a few at $1,500 without the lenses. And then they go up to like $10,000, maybe even more. That's about the highest that I've seen. Do you need a full-size sensor? Absolutely not. This camera does not have a full-size sensor, and many DSLRs do not. If you do go to Costco and look at the cameras they have there, none of those have full-size sensors. So they have what's called a crop sensor. And that means that they record less information in the end because the sensor is smaller. And again, it's not a really big deal for most of us. So how many of you, you'll have to speak up, of course, how many of you regularly print out your images? Anybody?
Well, I send them to like Walgreens to get printed, but I'll do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you do have your images printed out. Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I print out mine from time to time because I do.
Right.
I do some band photos, so I have some glossy ones that I usually give to the bands directly.
Okay. Right.
Just from time to time, though.
So what size would you say you guys print out generally?
I do 8.5 by 11, but I've done the 10-inch ones.
8 by 10?
Yeah,
like
I believe.
5 by 6.
Yeah, some here.
4 by 6.
Yeah,
5 by
these
7.
Oh,
8
yeah,
by
5 by
10.
7. Like that.
Yeah.
Right. 5 by 7. 5 by 10.
8.5 by 11.
8.5 by 11. Right. So my first camera, again, had a 1.7 megapixel capacity, which is really pathetic. Even our phone cameras now have 7 megapixels. But that camera made nice images, Nikon lens. And the prints it made were fine if they weren't very large. So the largest you could print out where it still looked really sharp, this may be 4 by 6 inches. And after that, it started to look fuzzy and not as sharp, not so great. So for you guys, if you're printing larger images, you want to have something, you know, a camera that has a greater capacity, a larger sensor, one that contains more pixels. But for many of us who don't print out regularly or who never print out images, whose images just stay on the computers and mailed or posted or whatever, it doesn't really matter. We don't have to spend $10,000 on a camera body. We don't need a 50 megapixel sensor or even a 10 megapixel sensor, because if the images never leave the screen, they'll look sharp. Even if the file sizes, even if the resolution is very low, they'll still look really quite good on the screen. It's when you want to take them off and make actual prints that will make a difference. And it will make a difference. But again, for most of us who look at most of our images online or on the computer, we don't need to have a full-size sensor. We don't need to have a really expensive, even non-full-size sensor camera that, you know, that has a greater capacity. So just know that you do not have to spend a tremendous amount of money on a camera to make really prints. And in terms of the image itself, well, you make the image, not the camera. You can have the best equipment in the world and still make boring or crappy images, right? So it's you and what you put into it, and your that goes into the making of a successful image and the composition, which we'll talk about over the course of this term. But anyway, back to the camera itself. So that's how the SLR functions. There's another type of camera called the rangefinder, which does not contain a mirror. We'll talk about that maybe next time. So these cameras, the 35 millimeter cameras, fall into the format of small. So there are 3 formats of cameras in terms of size: small, medium, and large. And we use small format cameras by and large. And kind of counterintuitively, it was the large ones that came first, and then medium, and then small. And in terms of complexity, electronics, and so on, the small format cameras are generally the most complex in terms of electronics. So at this point in history, 35 millimeter cameras are pretty much the only small format cameras left. In the past, there were others. In my youth, a long time ago, we had 110 cameras and 126, which used tiny little cartridges, film cartridges. And they made tiny little negatives that were maybe, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch, you know, by 3/8 of an inch. They were tiny. And in fact, there were tiny little spy cameras. If you've ever seen movies from the 50s or 60s, you know, spy movies where Simon Templar or someone, you know, is going in to photograph Soviet documents and takes out this tiny little camera and makes images. Now, those really existed. They're no longer used, I assume, for espionage, but they were. So small format cameras, that's what we use to be differentiated from medium and large format cameras. So just briefly, medium format film cameras also use roll film, but a larger format of roll film. So 35 millimeter film has a width of 35 millimeters, which is a little more than 1.5 inches, I guess. And medium format cameras use 120 film, which is 2.25 inches in width, or about 6 centimeters. And so the cameras that fall into that category have shutters, that window at the back of the camera, that are larger, that are those dimensions. So 6 centimeters by something else. And unlike 35 millimeter cameras, these cameras, different manufacturers made different sizes of shutters to make different sized images. So some are wider than others. They all have longer than others. They all have the same width, 6 centimeters, because that's determined by the size of the film. The most common, commonly seen format is 6 by 7 centimeters. So the manufacturers of the medium format cameras differ for the most part from the small format. So small format is dominated by Nikon and Canon, also Pentax, and now Sony and Panasonic, who were traditionally electronics manufacturers. The medium format cameras made by Rollei and Hasselblad, Mamiya, and Yashica, and Pentax, the most commonly seen. So Mamiya makes a beautiful 6 by 7, so 6 centimeters by 7 centimeter camera. Hasselblad, which is a Swedish camera, makes 6 by 6, which is square, which we're not so used to. Those of us who use 35 millimeter are used to a rectangular format. But anyway, they come in different sizes, different types of cameras. Even the SLRs, they're different looking SLRs. Hasselblad's looks quite different than the SLR we're used to. And then there are TLRs, or twin lens reflex cameras. And as I said, our SLRs are called single lens reflex cameras to differentiate between those and the TLRs. And TLRs, as the name implies, have 2 lenses. And it's the upper lens that has the reflex mirror behind it. So it's the upper lens that you see through. And if you've ever seen people photographing, using a camera where they're looking down into it rather than holding it up to their faces, that is a camera that has what's called a waist level viewfinder. And twin lens reflex cameras have that. So people look down into them in order to focus. But it's the lower lens that contains the shutter. It has the shutter behind it. So it's the lower lens that makes the image or takes the picture. And so there is a problem there called parallax. And for those of you, if any of you have taken astronomy or physics, you've probably encountered parallax angles, and parallax error. And for us, what that means is there's an offsetting between what we see through the upper lens and what's recorded through the lower lens. And the greater this angle, the more offsetting there is. So if you're to photograph my face and you see me in the TLR like this, what might get recorded is this. And so the closer you are to the subject, the more of that offsetting, the parallax error you'll have. As you back up away from the subject, that angle gets smaller and smaller. And so you don't really see that offsetting. So if you're making landscapes with a TLR or a camera that has this problem, you won't even see that offsetting. But if you're making close-ups or close portraits, you'll definitely see that. Anyway, TLRs are actually still made, I think in some ways more as a gimmick for digital photography. I don't even know if both lenses actually function, but they're out there. Okay, that's a repeat. And finally, large format cameras. So large format cameras are they were the first cameras. They are the lowest tech. There aren't really very many, if any, electronic large format cameras, and these are big cameras. There are a few digital ones, but for the most part, they're very, very basic. They have no electronics, and they're based on the first cameras to be invented. And so the first cameras didn't record information, they were actual rooms, and they were called camera obscuras. Camera, the word camera means room or chamber in Latin. If you're a Spanish speaker, perhaps you know the word recamera, which I believe means chamber or room. And obscura means dark. And so it's been known since the time of Aristotle, well before the Common Era, that if you have a room, a darkened room that has a hole in one wall, little hole or aperture, then projection of whatever is outside of that room will appear on the opposite wall, upside down and reversed from right to left. And that's actually how we see the world, though we don't know it. But our wonderful brains correct for the way the light enters our brains through the lens in our eye and then the optic nerve. So the information that we see is also originally upside down and reversed from right to left. But our brains compensate for that. These early camera obscuras, the rooms obviously couldn't do that. Excuse me. At some point during the Renaissance and the from the late 13 into the 1600s, but sometime earlier in the Renaissance, these camera obscuras were manufactured, handmade, but to be portable, kind of like that. Not portable as in our nice little phones these days, but portable in the way that the first Mac SEs were portable in that you could put them in a backpack and carry them around. So they were miniaturized and a lens was inserted. So lenses in the West, in the European area, were discovered or invented by glass blowers. And if you've ever seen glass being blown, either in person or on TV, you know that they dip a rod into molten glass, which is like melted sand, and blow it and shape it. And then when they're done, they cut it off with a big big clippers. And if they haven't clipped off enough, they clip off a little more. And it was discovered that these discs that they cut off magnified light. And to the people of the time, they looked a little bit like lentils, little lentils. And so they were called lentice. That's where we get the word lens from. But these first magnifiers, these lenses, were used by monks when they were transcribing books. So before the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, books were all copied by hand by monks. And the vast majority of books, though not all, were religious texts. So those lenses eventually were used in other professions. Galileo used a double-lensed telescope to observe the heavens, the celestial bodies, and a lens was inserted into the camera obscura. And if you look at the construction here of the camera obscura, you can see there's a mirror here in the same way that the reflex camera uses a mirror. So the light enters the camera through the lens, is focused by the lens, and then is reflected up, in this case, to a piece of what's called ground glass. So the image appeared there, and then the user, an artist usually, would put a piece of fine writing paper on that was kind of like, pretty much like tracing paper, and could trace what was in front of the camera obscura. The image without tracing was not permanent. If you moved the camera, the image changed. When you closed it up, it disappeared. So the only way to make a permanent impression of what was in front of the camera is to sketch it or to trace it. It's now thought by many art historians that a number of Renaissance painters used the camera obscura as a basis for their paintings. This is a big argument in art history, which you probably are not especially interested in, but some people feel this is so, others are like mortally offended at the thought of one of these painters having used a tool of this sort. So again, it's an issue, an interesting one, I think, but I realize not everyone does. But those were the first cameras. They couldn't record information permanently, but it was eventually figured out that it could be used to make permanent photographic images, again, with the use of these specific silver compounds that could be used to record information on film. The large format camera, again, is very basic. It is made up of a body, which is just like a box, often a box of wood. And the film is not roll film, but actual sheets of film. And there are different size sheets of film that fit different cameras from 4 by 5 inches up to 20 by 24 inches, which is really huge. The camera then has this accordion-like thing, which is called the bellows, and it expands and contracts, and that's what's used to focus the light entering the camera through the lens, which is affixed to the end of the bellows. So even the smallest of these cameras, the 4 by 5s, are kind of bulky. They are certainly not good for action photography or street photography because they require a fair amount of setup. So if you've ever seen someone around with a big dark cloth over his or her head fiddling with something, that's most likely a large format camera. So the image, the projection of the image entering the camera will appear on this piece of ground glass at the back, but it's pretty faint. And so photographers use a big dark cloth over their heads and the camera so that they can see this image more clearly. Once the film is inserted, and the film comes, you have to put it into a film holder. That goes between the glass and the lens, and so you can no longer see what's going to be recorded. So you have to do all your setup beforehand. So it's an involved process. It takes a while. It is not really designed for action photography. But the cameras have some huge advantages. They have huge disadvantages, but some great advantages. And one of those is just the sheer size of the film, because there's so much more information. So if you were to use a sheet of 8 by 10 film, if you wanted to make an 8 by 10 print, there's no enlarging involved at all. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So there's no quality lost. And so here's a little drawing of the amounts of information, and down and in this upper corner is the size of a piece of 35 millimeter film relative to the 8 by 10. And you can see that there's a huge difference. And so if you have this piece of 35 millimeter film and you want to blow it up, it's not that you're increasing the information. You're just increasing the size of that information. And so if you've seen pictures that look as if they're made up of blobs of color, or blobs of black and white and gray, with film, what you're seeing are the actual grains of silver that make up that image that have been blown way, way, way up. The digital equivalent to that is called pixelation. And if you blow up a digital image beyond a certain point, you start to see the individual pixels or squares that make up that image. And of course, the more pixels there are, the less pixelation you get as you blow it up. If there are only a few pixels, you know, let's say you have, 100 pixels in this little area, and you blow it up to this, well, then you just have 100 big pixels. Whereas if you had 1,000 or 1,000,000, it's not that you don't blow it up, but because they're so small, you don't see that effect nearly as quickly. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Mm-hmm. So there are digital large format cameras in that you can hook up a sensor to the large format camera, which in turn is hooked up to a hard drive or computer. And the sensor, or it's a scanner really, it scans across the back of the camera and records that information. The file sizes are so large that it does not make sense to use a memory card, because the memory card would be filled with just a few images. So the information is stored or transferred to and stored on a hard drive. Okay, so those are the three formats of cameras: small, medium, and large. We generally use small. You can use medium and or large, and you can get digital medium format cameras, certainly, and you could get a large one, maybe. They cost a lot, a lot more. But if you want to experiment, if you come across a medium format or a large format camera, film camera, that's fine. Go ahead and shoot it if you want to, and have that film scanned. And then you can work on those scanned images in class. If you want to work on your own in a darkroom, that's fantastic. For this class, which is digital photography, you're welcome to work on scanned images. One thing I think I said last time as well, though it's in the syllabus, is that I want you to work on new images for this class. You're welcome to work on other images as much as you want, but for the assignments, I want you to make new images and turn those in. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Okay, one more topic, and that is file format. So we said that when the sensor records the information and digitizes it, it then forms it, gives it a format. And there are three main formats that are used for images. And the most commonly seen by far is the JPEG, that's up here, which stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. Nobody calls it that. Most people probably don't even know that's what it stands for, and you don't have to know that either. But that's what it stands for. And so when you open up, so let me ask you this. When you open an image on your computer, if you just double click on it, what application opens up? Let's say somebody sends you an image and you download it onto your computer and you double click on it and it opens. What application does it open in for you? Anybody?
I think usually JPEG, right?
Well, the file type is JPEG, correct. So when you double click on that JPEG, what program does it open up in?
I usually use Irfan View. It's a pretty small, easy one, but you have to physically assign it on your computer to open that. Otherwise, it uses whatever generic program and it kind of limits you, whatever
Right.
comes with your computer.
That's right. So usually there's some application or program that is the default for images. And when you double click on a JPEG, it just automatically opens up, and very few of us actually pay attention to what that application is, unless you're like Chris, yes? Chris, or if you want a specific program to be used, and then you have to go into the settings of your computer and tell it that you want this specific application or program to be used, or to be the default program for images. Otherwise, you know, some other application will be used, and usually that's preview. So mine is preview. If I just double click on any old JPEG, that's what opens up. Sometimes for Mac users, it will be iPhoto or Photo, or you can designate Photo to be the program that opens up. But there's usually a default. Now those default applications can read JPEGs. They can read the next type here called TIFF, which stands for Tagged Image File Format, but they cannot read what are called raw images or raw image format images. So as I said, JPEGs are ubiquitous. They're, you know, most photos, digital photos that you see that are emailed, you know, that you download or whatever, they're all JPEGs, almost all of them. And JPEGs fall into one of two main file format categories: lossy and lossless. So, where did it go? Hold on. Supposed to be here. Sorry. Here we go. Lossy and lossless. So lossy means that when the file was made, when it was formatted, a certain amount of information was discarded, was tossed. Lossless means that the information was not. And you may say, well, why in the world would I want any information dumped? I want it all. Well, the more information there is, the larger the file type, the larger the file. And the larger the file, the more space it takes up. And the fewer images you can make and fit onto a memory card. And also the larger the file, the longer it takes to send to somebody. Maybe there are often file size restrictions. And so large files cannot be sent. And so it's desirable to have a smaller file. JPEGs come in 3 levels of quality: fine, normal, and basic. And fine tosses the least amount of information, and basic the most. Of these file types here, so TIFFs can also dump some, though much less, or they can be lossless in that they don't toss information, but that information is still given a format, a form that can be read by other applications. Raw files contain all of the information that was recorded at that time, and they just keep it, but don't organize it. So it's not given a format, and therefore those files cannot be read by the majority of programs or applications that are used for images, the basic ones like iPhoto or Preview or something relatively basic. Adobe Lightroom reads them automatically, and Adobe Photoshop opens them in a specific raw program and then opens them in Photoshop. But most programs can't deal with the raw files on their own. So your cameras, many of them will give you a choice. You can shoot in RAW, you can shoot in JPEG, or you can shoot both. And two images or two files will be made for each image, one RAW and one JPEG. So let's talk about what happens with the JPEG image. So here, a sample is taken and then the surrounding, okay. So the computer or the sensor looks at the image that you're making. And in this case, we have an ocean scene with the sun and a cloud. Right? And it looks at the scene and says, hey, look at all that blue sky. It's all the same, which it's not true, but it's all the same. So why should I record all this blue sky and take up all this room with information that's the same? Why don't I take a sample and then write a rule or an algorithm that says a certain amount of space, a certain circumference around my sample will be dumped. That information will be dumped, and then it will just be filled up with my sample when it's reopened. And the camera will do that in hundreds, probably thousands of different areas, saying, okay, I'll dump this amount of information, and then when the file's opened, I'll just fill it with the sample. And in this way, a lot of information is discarded. The information is considered redundant or irrelevant because it can be filled in, those spaces can be filled in with information that's still there. And that can look okay, or it can look horrible, depending on where it's taken from and depending on how much is taken. So as we said, there are 3 levels of JPEG images or files, and each one takes out more information, and therefore the quality of the image decreases. And so if this is the amount of information that is taken and discarded with a fine JPEG, then with normal, the sensor will say, hey, I don't have to stop here. I can go out to here and discard all of that information and then just fill it in with my sample. And we know when we look at things, it's hard to see with the sky for us, but with things that are closer, even if they look the same, as if they're pretty homogeneous from farther away, when we come in, there are a lot of subtle variations in tone and color and so on that are important. And if they're just the same information is repeated over and over, it loses subtlety and starts to look really bad. And so by the time you get down to basic, where a huge amount of information is dumped, it can look terrible. And so you'll say, well, why would you ever shoot basic? Well, my answer would be, you don't. But some people do. And for images that never leave the computer, it doesn't matter. A relatively small image on the computer will look pretty good. I'm sure some of you have then blown them up and you're like, ugh, that looks horrible. But when you put it back down to small size, it looks fine. But again, when you make it larger, then you see all of those imperfections. But if you know that your image will never, ever, ever leave this format, this environment, then by all means, basic. However, in general, you probably want to shoot the highest quality that you can, because you can always dump information after the fact. You can never get it back, however. So I think you're best off shooting the highest quality that you can. Do you have to shoot RAW? If your camera offers you RAW and JPEG, do you need to make a choice? Should you make a choice? That's more up to you. I would at least shoot the highest quality JPEG possible, the fine JPEG. I shoot RAW. Sometimes I shoot RAW and JPEG. So I know, of course, that RAW images cannot be read by all applications. And if I want to send an image to a friend, or if I want to submit it for something, I'll submit a JPEG. And so maybe I will shoot JPEGs as well. So I don't have to go into Lightroom and manipulate my image and convert it to JPEG. I can just send out that JPEG. But again, I recommend that you shoot the highest quality possible. Now that will take up more space on your memory card, and of course on your hard drive when you store those images. So I just want to show you, I guess, what happens to the space on the memory card when I change the quality of the image that I'm making. So on the back of your camera, if you have an SLR, there will be one button probably that says qual, for quality. And if you hold that in, it will allow you to change the image, the image type or file type that you're making. So I usually have it set to RAW. And then on the LCD, it will tell me how many images I can make on this particular card at that setting. And every card differs, and of course the number of images you've already made will influence, will affect the numbers. But right now it says that I can make 1,000 RAW images on this card. When I change that from RAW to fine, that number more than doubles. So it changes from 1,000 to 2,400. And so if I shoot JPEG, a fine JPEG instead of RAW, I can make more than twice as many images. But that should be an indication also of what's happened to the amount of information in each image. So if I can fit 2.5 times as many images, then probably about half of the information in each image has been discarded, right? So the quality has to go down significantly. And then if I change from fine to normal, I can make twice as many images again. I can make 4,800 images. So again, half of that information is being dumped, is being tossed. And when I change from normal to basic, I can make 9,500 images. So I think that really shows you how much information is really being dumped every time you decrease the quality level. So I went from 1,000 at RAW to 2,400 with fine JPEG to 4,800 with the normal JPEG, finally to 9,500 with the basic JPEG. So that's a tremendous loss of information and therefore of quality. And again, I recommend shooting the highest quality that you can. And if you can't or you don't want to shoot RAW, that's fine, but at least shoot the highest quality JPEG. Because again, you can decrease the size, you can dump information, you can decrease the resolution after the fact, but you can never get it back. Okay, any questions on that or anything else? Anybody? No, nothing. Okay. Well, on Canvas, I posted two little intro videos on Lightroom. So it's just these two are pretty much an introduction. First one to the Lightroom environment, I guess, which we'll also go over. I'll go over, but these instructional videos were made by a woman named Julianne Cost, who has for many years worked for Adobe and has done many of their tutorials. I have found that of the tutorials I've listened to, she's the best that I've found. She is very clear, concise, and puts things simply, you know, in understandable terminology. None of the tutorials are so long that you're like, oh God, too much information. You know, they're pretty short and concise. And I'll continue to post hers. And if you have objections or comments, of course, let me know. If you have suggestions for others, I'm always open to that, to discovering new things, to listening to them, you know, absolutely. So let me know what you think when you have listened to them. I don't think that it'll take up more than 10 minutes of your time total for both of them, if even. These handwritten notes are posted, or should be, I'll check. And more notes and descriptions will be posted as well. Your first assignment won't be due for a little while, but you do want to have your camera, of course, and hopefully Lightroom in place for when we are working on stuff. So your first assignment, so to speak, is not a graded assignment, but I want you to be shooting so that you will have images to upload onto Lightroom or into Lightroom when we get started. Okay, and it doesn't matter to me what you shoot, it's up to you. Even in the classroom, I don't care, shoot what you'd like, you know, within reason. If you're involved in illicit activities, you probably don't want to show them to me, but obviously you're working on your own, so whatever. Just have some images to upload, either RAW or JPEG, doesn't matter. And hopefully we'll be doing that. I'll go over it next week, but hopefully you'll be, you know, looking at these videos and getting started. Okay. One other thing about the Zoom meetings, and that is they are not required. You don't have to attend. You can drop it, you know, you can cut out at any time. It's up to you. This is when our class would normally have met, but these are not normal times, I realize. This is being recorded, so all my ums and ahs, and excuse me for a moment, those will be on the recording, but the recording will be posted on Canvas, so you can access it anytime. Okay, but again, they're not required. I love to see you, I really do. I prefer meeting in person because I like to see who you are and have interactions, but again, it's up to you. I mean, I can see that most of you don't want to be seen for some reason, which is too bad for me, but it's entirely up to you, of course.
And do we know where on Canvas those videos are? I just took a look and I didn't see anything in like the discussions or anything, so I don't know if they're fully up yet for the Lightroom.
I'll check. I mean, it's not on yet because I haven't uploaded. This one has to be, it has to like be given format and then and saved, and then I can post it.
Those
Okay.
mainly the ones that are on Lightroom, because I figured this would come back later.
Oh, it's not there yet?
I didn't see it per se. Sorry. But unless it was just somewhere, I looked in like the discussions and anywhere, so maybe it's
Check in the
not
mod.
unpublished
You know what?
anywhere.
You might check in the modules. I think that's where I put it, but I'll check. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I might have forgotten to hit publish too. So
Yeah, that's
I'll
what
go.
I was thinking, because I was thinking they'd be either discussions, files, conferences, but I didn't see anything in there at this point. So it just might be something simple like that.
Okay, I'll check. And again, check modules.
Modules.
That's
I think on the dashboard there isn't anything that says modules here.
Not some super modules.
in that case, I will check as soon as we're done.
Thanks.
Okay, 'cause they should be visible. But if they're not there, then I'll post them somewhere else if I can't get that to be visible. Okay, but they will be available to you.
Hi,
Anyone
Sita.
else?
Sita, am I saying your name right? Sita?
Yes, you are. Sita.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Are the meetings on Wednesdays or on Mondays?
They will probably be on Mondays. Now, the feedback I got was Monday for anyone who had any preference. Most people didn't care, but when someone had preference, it was for a Monday. So I thought, okay, well, Mondays are fine, but if anyone has strenuous objections, let me know.
And it's at Mondays at 2:30.
2:30.
That's the,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's a consistent set time, right? Every week.
I mean, we may not end up having a meeting every single week. You know, depending on how you guys feel. Like, for instance, if in 3 weeks, you know, then consistently only 3 people end up being here, then maybe it's a sign that you're not really getting much out of my input, and that, I mean, I hope you do, but that maybe we won't do them every week anyway. Okay, but for right now, we'll try for Mondays and see how it goes. Okay, and if you have feedback about what I say in Zoom and how it's presented, please let me know. I'm open. You know,
Well, for me personally, everything you say is helpful because I don't have much background with photography. So everything that
Good.
you say and the meetings personally for me are helpful. I just wanted to clarify the time. So you'll send out an invite or we log in through Canvas?
I'll send in the invite. Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, Canvas isn't letting me do Zoom for some reason. It has some other like big balloon thing, which I don't know. So I prefer to do Zoom at this point anyway, because I know how to use it and so on. I will try and figure out how to use it within Canvas, and that will make it easier for you, I think. But so far as I know, I can still post the recording of our meeting here into Canvas. Okay. But right now you cannot access the meeting from Canvas, but I until such time as we can, I'll just email you guys the invitation, the Zoom invitation. Okay.
Okay, great. And then when is the first assignment due again? Sorry, I just want to clarify that and write it down.
We haven't gone over any of the information yet. So,
Okay.
so it won't be due until we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Absolutely. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments, issues? Nothing. I see part of a bed. Now it's gone. Okay, well, in that case, have a delightful and safe weekend. I hope you can be shooting. I realize we can't go wandering all over the way we used to, but perhaps that will encourage us to find new subjects among familiar objects and places and people, right? So take care of yourselves and see you kind of on Monday. Okay.
Okay, have a good one.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks
All right,
very
thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye now.